Hello, and welcome very much to Marketing, How to Market Bread Communism, the easy way, with me, American Johnson. For better or for worse, I've been doing marketing for a long time, professionally. And even though it has caused me to hate myself at many times throughout my life, and I've done some terrible things for some terrible people, it still comes in handy when it comes to making communist propaganda and getting people to watch it. That's why I've decided to make this series of videos on how you can do marketing for communism. So this is going to be a video series, and this is part one of that series. We're going to talk about marketing. I'm going to teach you how to do it. You could use the advice given in this series to make money. I've used these techniques to make a shitload of money for a lot of really evil capitalists. And so, yeah, these are tried and true marketing, branding, PR, communications techniques, and we are going to découtrement them and rework them in the service of BreadTube, or at least that's the idea here. So I'm going to use a lot of marketing terminology. In fact, I'm going to be using the established marketing terminology, even though a lot of it's kind of creepy and annoying. And the reason that I'm using this terminology is so that if you want to go on and do further research by yourself, you won't get confused and you'll know what to Google. So don't get mad at me for using these terrible, shitty corporate marketing terms. It's just the established lexicon of this field. But we're going to use marketing for the purposes of good, not evil. We're going to use marketing to promote the ideas of anarchism, communism, leftism, and all that fun stuff. So to begin with, I'm going to introduce the four most basic elements of any marketing or public awareness sort of a campaign. And just to list them off, they are targeting, reach, frequency, and impact. So we'll go through those one by one very briefly and then start to examine how they interact with each other systematically. So targeting is probably the first thing we want to think about when we're planning some kind of a marketing campaign or when we're wanting to boost awareness of something. And targeting just means that making sure that your messages reach the right people. If somebody receives your message and it is irrelevant to them or they are very unlikely to act on the messaging, then that's a waste. It's a waste of resources, whether it's a waste of money you spend on advertising, a waste of your time, a waste of a view. Because of course, on the YouTube platform, there is a finite number of views that any given video is going to get. And you want to make sure that you can maximize the impact of every single view. So within targeting, we basically have two aspects of targeting. We have placement and we have messaging. Okay, and they're both very, very important for making sure that the right message gets to the right audience. So messaging would be the creative work that you do to make sure that whatever marketing materials you're designing, whatever media you're producing, is going to appeal to the target audience which you've identified, right? And then placement means putting the program that you've produced somewhere where the target audience is very likely to see it, and you want to be as targeted and focused as possible. So the steps that come to play when you're targeting, step one is identifying your target, trying to figure out, imagine, or better yet, do research and find out what kinds of people are most likely to answer your call to action. And we'll talk more about calls to action later in the video. But yeah, so you're basically trying to identify the right people who are very likely to buy your product, or in this case, buy into the ideas that we're promoting. And so you want to, so a great example of that would be pickup trucks. It's something that's kind of easy for us to wrap our heads around. So if you're trying to market pickup trucks, you're probably not going to want to be marketing them to people who are in, like big urban cities like New York City, living in a small apartment where there's not a lot of parking around. That's probably not going to be the best target market. You're probably going to want to find people who have to use trucks for their work. You're going to want to find people who might be culturally predispositioned to want to own a pickup truck. So that's why pickup truck companies tend to do their placements in these very targeted ways where, like on television, you're very likely to see pickup truck commercials on like the Home and Garden Network, because people who, own a home and do a lot of home improvement, they're likely to want to have a pickup truck to, haul supplies around and that sort of thing. It would make less sense to put a pickup truck commercial on, like the Food Network, because there's nothing that would indicate that somebody who's really into food is necessarily going to have demand for a pickup truck, right? So that's what targeting placement is. And then the messaging is, all the creative decisions you make to make the commercial for the pickup truck. So obviously, if you watch pickup truck commercials, they tend to talk about how tough they are. They show like working people who are sweaty and sweating around the trucks. And they want to show how the trucks are strong and they can pull a lot of boats and shit. That's the kind of messaging that's going to be effective for a pickup truck versus like a minivan, which is going to be more focused on, having a family and being able to put all your family stuff in the minivan. You're not likely to see a pickup truck commercial that's focusing on the family aspects of owning a pickup truck. So that would be targeting messaging. Okay. So identify your target, produce your content so that it is messaged appropriately for the target, and then place it somewhere where your target is likely to see it and be more likely to act on it. And you want to filter out, I consider anybody who sees marketing material, a video or whatever, anybody who sees that and they're just not interested in it, that's a waste of resources. It's a waste of, money that you might have spent on an ad buy. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of everything. And every video or every piece is only going to get a finite number of views. And you want to make sure that each one of those views is as likely as possible to be placed in front of the right people. So when we're talking about specifically like BreadTube videos, it's pretty easy to think about the messaging, right? So some people might want to find a niche to market to that would be maybe, for instance, gamers, right? So then it's pretty easy. You make leftist-oriented content that would appeal to gamers. And Jimquisition is probably a great example of that. Jimquisition does a lot of sort of anti-capitalist messaging within gaming videos. And there are, other leftist gaming niche people, but Jimquisition is just a really good example of that. And so, and then if you have a gaming style leftist BreadTube channel with leftist gaming videos, you would want to place it where gamers are likely to see it. So that's pretty, straightforward. You'd want to go to like gaming oriented subreddits. You'd want to use hashtags on Twitter that are related to gaming, and use keywords in your YouTube videos that are related to gaming. I mean, it's pretty common sense, but it's something we need to be thoughtful about. And we want to make sure that that every message is messaged to the right target audience, placed before them properly, and that you've identified an appropriate audience for the video. So next we'll move on to the idea of reach. Okay. So reach is the idea of reaching, as many people as possible. So obviously this is where things like CPM come into play. You want to have as many thousands of people as possible viewing your content, sharing your meme, and what have you. And in many ways, reach can be the enemy of targeting, right? Like as a marketer, I'm always going to prefer to reach a smaller number of people that is highly targeted to my specific audience, right? It's very, very rare that you have a product or a message that is going to appeal universally to everyone. I would say with a YouTube video, that's almost never the case. Usually you're going to want to be much more niche and much more narrowly focused in your targeting. And so you're not going to want broad reach kinds of placements. So it's almost a waste of time to go to like a general subreddit that's just, you want to make sure that it's appropriate and it's not too general. You want to get as specific as possible because, we as BreadTubers, even if we're not spending money on ad placements, we still have a finite number of resources that we have. We have a finite amount of time we can use promoting our videos. So we want to make sure that the time that we're spending and all of these resources that we're spending, that we're maximizing them. So make sure that you're finding places that are as targeted as possible. You're using keywords that are as targeted as possible. I mean, I see, because there are tools that you can use, like TubeBuddy is a great tool where you can go around and you can see what keywords people are using on their YouTube videos. And I see all the time where smaller YouTube channels are using these very broad general keywords. And I do that sometimes myself, But like, you don't want your only keywords to be like leftism, communism, LeftTube, BreadTube, politics. Those are like very, very general, broad keywords. And I could probably do many whole videos on keyword optimization, but generally speaking, it's better to, and you have a limited number of keywords you can add to like a YouTube video too. You have 500 characters or 500 words, no, 500 characters that you can add to a YouTube video. So, you know, you want to make sure you're maximizing the targeting. And I know that we're supposed to be talking about reaching right now, but I'm trying to show the relationship between targeting and reach. Now, that said, you want to get as much reach as possible within that target audience. So a simple example of this is like, if you're trying to find a subreddit to post your game video on, and there's like, you know, if you had to choose between a very, very small gaming subreddit and a huge gaming subreddit with like 5,000 people versus like 100 people, you're probably, if you could only pick one, you'd probably want to choose the one with 5,000 people. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, of course, and there are advantages to posting on these smaller subreddits. So that brings us to impact, okay? So impact is the amount of kind of emotional impact that your material has on the audience. And this is where things like quality of production come into play, but it also relates to reach and targeting. So if you make a video that is very well made, very well produced, and what you would think could be very impactful, but there is no targeting whatsoever. It's just this very general, broad sort of topic that you're covering, and there's no targeting taken into mind. That will actually diminish the impact. People are going to respond more to things that they feel are targeted specifically to them. So if you make a gaming video and you want to really like reach through and grab gamers who are watching it, you want to do things like make jokes and references that, you know, most gamers are going to get, even if that would alienate like a broader audience. In this situation, that's good because you're trying to target your content to have impact with this one specific audience. And again, my rule of thumb is always favor more targeting over more reach while trying to maximize the reach within that target. And that will simultaneously maximize your impact, okay? So, but yeah, the general thing about impact to keep in mind is that that's where you're wanting to just have a really well-produced piece of content that, you know, do the best you can in terms of sound quality is probably the most important aspect. If the sound quality is terrible, nobody's going to watch your videos. You know, and then you can also worry about things like graphics and lighting and cameras and all that kind of stuff. But you know, and of course, scripting and writing and the creative ideas behind it. So the impact is very, very important. But you could make the greatest video in the world, but if you don't target it properly, if you don't place it properly, if you don't have the right reach, then it doesn't matter how impactful it was. So that's the thing. I see a lot of YouTube creators get very frustrated because they're doing really excellent work. And I see a lot of smaller YouTubers, they're doing excellent work, and they're making videos that would have a lot of impact, but they're screwing up on these other, you know, legs of the table. And so they're not getting any traction with their videos. So impact is very important, but it does not stand alone, and it's not the only consideration by any means. In fact, there are plenty of YouTubers who do really well with the other three things and have terrible impact, and they're very, very successful. PewDiePie, I would say, in my opinion, not a particularly fantastic, impactful content creator, but he does a great job marketing himself in a lot of other ways. He does a great job tailoring and targeting his content to his audience, you know, in very specific ways. And that's really why he's been as successful as he has been, in my opinion. So then the last element we're going to talk about now is frequency. And frequency is just how many times you get your messaging in front of, you know, an average typical individual viewer. And you want to get your frequency pretty high. So as marketers, we know that we're never going to make a sale on the first impression. It's very, very rare. Like say I'm selling shoes for a customer and I'm running banner ads, which are like just graphic ads that you'll see on websites, right? It's very unlikely that anybody's going to see an ad for that shoe company and then the first time they see it, click it, go to the shop and buy it, right? The way that marketing really works is it is a form of sort of conditioning and brainwashing. And you basically want to expose people to these ideas again and again and again. You want to impress on them many, many times. And it's been proven psychologically that people don't even notice a marketing message the first time they see it most of the time, unless it's very impactful. And some people have done some very clever things with sort of guerrilla viral marketing strategies to make their impact very high. But 99% of the time, you're not going to have that kind of success, and you're going to have frequency. And so that means, for instance, I'm sure you've noticed that when you're using YouTube, sometimes YouTube will keep showing you the same thumbnail again and again. They'll be trying to like present this video to you again and again and again. And maybe like the 6th or 7th time you've seen it, you'll be like, okay, all right, finally I'll watch this video, I guess, since YouTube wants me to watch it so much. That is frequency, and it works. If you see the shoe ad again and again and again, if it worms its way into your brain to where eventually you're going to be like, all right, I want to see what the shoe ad is all about. And to maximize frequency and to avoid something called frequency fatigue, that's where we want to have a lot of variety in the way we're presenting our messages to people. So with the shoe ad example, if you only have one image that you ever present to anybody, and it's the same image again and again, it's like one brown boot, the same brown boot again and again, that is going to have the opposite impact of what we intend. And it's going to people are just going to ignore it completely. Like it will be invisible to them. So you want to have frequency, but you also want to have variability in the way that you're presenting your stuff again and again and again. But you also want to have a cohesive sort of brand packaging that follows throughout all of it. So if you're going to do shoe ads where you're showing different shoes in every ad, you want to make sure that like your brand colors are consistent, your messaging is consistent, but you're varying like other aspects of it. And this is where really the science of marketing comes into play. And I'll do videos in the future where we talk a lot more about things like split testing and that sort of thing. But for now, all I really want you to understand are these 4 basic elements of targeting, reach, frequency, and impact. And we need to take all of these things into consideration whenever we are developing any kind of persuasive content. Here's some general advice that I'll give to anybody who's just starting out as a BreadTuber, or even if you've been doing this for a long time and you feel like you're not getting the traction you want. The first thing I would do is I would say you need to find a target audience that you can organically and comfortably identify with, and you want to hit that pretty hard, especially early on. So with non-compete, when I was first trying to identify my very first target audience, I was kind of at a loss because I wasn't really comfortable making gaming videos or pop culture reviews at that point in time. I was still kind of a newbie when it came to the left, and I really didn't have a voice established. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I was just I knew as a marketer that I needed to find a target audience. And so I decided that I would make my target audience essentially myself early on at the very beginning. And this was before Luna was on board. This is when I was doing the channel completely by myself. And I just thought, basically, I was thinking in my head of myself about 3 or 4 years ago, before I had started the channel, when I was like a deep centrist, sort of a liberal. And I tried to think about demographically and psychographically who I was. So demographics would be things like age, income bracket, gender, the hard statistics about who your audience might be. And then psychographics are things like their interests, their current political beliefs, their vocation, things that are going to have to do with their psychology and their mindset. So I was really basically thinking I can't be the only person who was like that in the world. I was basically a nerdy, late 20s, early 30s liberal who was into cheesy kind of comedy. And I just basically used that as my target audience. And it was an experiment, right? So advertising and marketing have a lot to do with experimentation. And my whole thing was, I'm just going to try it and see if it appeals to people. And if it does, then I'll keep going with that. And if not, maybe I'll try to narrow my niche. Maybe I'll try to go to a different direction. But for me, fortunately, I was pretty lucky that ended up working out, and people ended up liking, to some extent, cheesy ass puppet shows about communism. And of course, we have expanded since then. We brought, Luna has come in on board, and she's really added a lot to what we're doing. But yeah, that was how I first thought of my first target audience. And if you don't have an idea for a target audience and you really just don't know where to begin, I would say begin with yourself, because you are probably not alone. There are probably other people like you out there, and there's the added benefit that you know how to talk to people who are like you. You know the lingo of the interest that you have. You know the jokes that are going to land with people who are of a similar mindset. So it's really, all if all else fails and you have just no idea where to begin, start with yourself and make things that would appeal to you. And again, maybe make things that would appeal to a more liberal, centrist version of yourself, and try to think of what's going to psychologically and demographically make sense in terms of the content that you produce for that target audience that sort of reflects yourself. Don't try to reach a target audience that you don't really relate to, unless you have some very specific plan in mind. But generally speaking, and this is the rule of thumb for all marketing. This follows through to anything that you're doing in marketing. Always go for the lowest hanging fruit. And so that means, like, if you really do think it's important to, for instance, reach through to fascists and deprogram them and get them on board with leftism, that's great and all, but do you have the ability to speak the language of those fascists? Do you have the capability to talk to them on their level? I would say that most leftists don't have that capability. I have made some videos that target right-wing libertarians because I used to be a right-wing libertarian myself for most of my life. So for me, it's very easy for me to target right-wing libertarians, make content that I feel speaks to right-wing libertarians on their level. That's something I feel comfortable doing. Whereas I don't feel comfortable addressing fascists. And I consider fascists to be completely irrelevant to my videos. I don't want them watching my videos. If a fascist does watch my video, I consider that noise, a waste of my resources. Now, you might be a former fascist, or you might have some quality that it makes it likely for you to be able to, do that work. And if so, and if you feel confident doing that, more power to you. But generally speaking, we want to go after the lower hanging fruit. To me, that would be like liberals, people who are kind of apolitical, centrists. Those sorts of people, I feel, are generally more ripe for bread pilling and pulling over into our camp. Here's a great metaphor. Think of all the different audiences you could be reaching as a bunch of cups, empty cups, right? And if you try to, if you have like one jug of water, which is your content that you're pouring out there, it's better to fill one cup first, and then fill the next cup, and then fill the next cup, and then fill the next cup. If you're trying to fill like 10 cups simultaneously, and you're trying to reach out to all these different niches at the same time, it's a nightmare. You're going to be scattered all over the place. You're going to feel disconnected, and you're going to feel like erratic. Your audience is going to see this erratic stuff. It's going to turn them off because, like most people, they subscribe to your channel because they kind of want to see more of what they saw that they liked. That doesn't mean you have to do the same thing over and over again. But if you make a gaming video, if you're a brand new channel, you have 0 subscribers, you make a gaming video that does pretty well and gets you like 300 or 400 subscribers, and then next week you do like a makeup tutorial, right? Which makeup tutorials are great too, but like jumping from one completely different ship to another completely different ship right at the beginning, you're going to lose all that momentum you just had. Right? So you just picked up all these gamers as subscribers, and now suddenly you're doing makeup tutorials. That's going to throw off your audience. A lot of people are going to immediately unsubscribe. They're going to get confused. You don't want to confuse your audience. You want them to kind of know what to expect. I like to think of it as like writing haikus. You want to find a haiku structure. You want to find the structure or this niche that works for you, and then have a lot of variation within that structure, within that haiku. So you can write 1,000 different haiku poems that are all completely different from one another, but they all fit within that structure. So you want to find a structure that you're comfortable with, that's getting you traction, and then do variation within that structure until you feel like you've gotten to a level that you're comfortable with. Then you can start really, branching on to the next thing and filling that cup up. Now, all this advice is just advice only. It's based on my experience as a marketer. You can break any rule, but my whole thing with rules is you should follow the rules until you feel very confident that you understand them deeply. Then you'll know how you can break rules, without breaking yourself or your project. So early on, I would say, find a target niche, find a voice for yourself that's focused on this kind of specific subject area, and get really good at that, and get really established as doing that. And then as you grow, then you can start to reach out. Maybe, or maybe not. Maybe you decide you want to just keep doing this thing that works for you forever, and plenty of YouTubers do that, and they're very, very successful. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, if you look at the really popular, really powerfully voiced YouTubers out there, like H-Bomber Guy, like ContraPoints, like Ollie. These folks they have a formula, right? And I'm not saying that they're formulaic. I have formulas too. And I have my formula that we use for non-compete as well. But they have this formula, but then within the formula, they have infinite variety and variation. And then, once they get really established, then they can go out and do different things. And that's kind of what I'm encouraging you to do if you're just starting out here. Really try to get one good formula when it comes to your targeting, your impact, your reach, and your frequency, and drive that as far as you can take it before you jump onto another formula or start formulating something new. And the last thing I want to say is to not be discouraged when it comes to numbers, because marketing and YouTube is all a number game, okay? And here's how the math of marketing works. We want to, again, get our reach maximized within our target audience. We want to maximize our reach as much as possible so we can get as many eyeballs on what we're doing and what we're saying as possible, because again, we know that the vast majority of people are not going to buy our product, okay? So if I'm doing a marketing campaign for a client, generally speaking, so let's introduce a little bit more language now. We have impressions, right? And that's whenever somebody sees your campaign, your marketing campaign. They see your advertisement, they see your video, whatever. That's an impression. And I'm saying just like they scroll by and it like pops up on their screen. Even if they don't even slow down or stop, it appeared in their vision, right? Or their ears or whatever senses they're using to consume media. So like if you're scrolling down Google and you see an ad, that's an impression, even if you don't click it, right? So those are impressions. Then we have click-throughs, all right? I'm using more digital marketing terminology now, but it'll work for what we're talking about for sure. So if they click through, that means they clicked the ad and they went to whatever landing page or whatever content you have set up for them to see, okay? So you have your impressions, then you have your click-throughs, and then we have conversions, okay? So a conversion is somebody who does what you ask them to do. Usually with marketing campaigns, that's making a sale, okay? So it means you've converted them to doing what you want them to do with your call to action. The call to action is the most important part of any marketing piece, okay? And your call to action, it needs to be short, very specific, and there needs to be no question whatsoever, no ambiguity about what you're asking them to do. So, typically for a YouTube channel, the call to action at the end is, of course, click like and subscribe, ring that bell, subscribe now, blah, subscribe. That's the call to action for most YouTube channels, because you want people to be coming back and getting that frequency, right? That's a subscription. You want people to subscribe so you can get frequency. You want a lot of people to subscribe so you can get reach, and you want the right people to subscribe so that it's targeted. And then you want to make really good content that's going to have a lot of impact on that target audience. All that said, the math of marketing is all about big numbers that get reduced to very small numbers, right? So my rule of thumb with any marketing campaign, generally speaking, is I want to get 5% click-throughs from impressions, and then I want to get 5% of those click-throughs to become conversions. And those numbers, that causes those big number of impressions to shrink very rapidly, okay? And you can actually go into your Creator Studio on YouTube, and you can look at some of these analytics and see how many impressions your thumbnails are getting, and you can see how many of those get converted into click-throughs, and then you can do the math with like how many people are actually subscribing and commenting and engaging. So just to go through the math really quick, if I did a campaign and 100,000 people actually saw my ad, I would be thrilled if 5% of those people clicked that ad. So if 5,000 of that 100,000 people actually clicked my ad, I would be very, very happy about that. And then if 5% of those 5,000 people actually bought the product, so if 250 people bought the product, I would consider that a great success. So that means that of the 100,000 people that saw my ad, if 250 of them actually go forward and buy the product, I'll be very, very happy. Okay. And that's why reach is so important, and targeting so that you're reaching the right people, and impact so that you're having this emotional impact on the right people, and frequency drives up the likelihood to convert, right? So that's why I would be very excited if I got 250 people out of 100,000 impressions to actually buy a product. In YouTube terms, here's a really great crystal clear example of that. If I have a video like my Beauty Pipeline video that has 500,000 views, right? That I would call that 500,000 views would be like 500,000 impressions. In this example, we'll consider that an impression, right? So they watched the video, right? Now I would consider like a click through in a YouTube video to be leaving a like or a downvote, any kind of comment. That would be an engagement. That would be a click-through, right? I'm being a little loosey-goosey with the terms here, but YouTube's not exactly the same as most digital marketing environments, so bear with me. But so if I could get of those 500,000 people who watch the video, if I could get 5% or 25,000 of those people to engage in some way, right? That's step one of my success, right? So then of those 25,000 people that left some kind of comment, left some kind of upvote, downvote, or shared or whatever, if I could get around 1,250, 5% of the 25,000, if I can get 5% of those people to actually change their opinion in a positive way, either going from negative to neutral or from neutral to positive, I would consider that a great success. So on the Beauty Pipeline video, I've got 8,339 comments, 28,000 upvotes, 12,000 downvotes. Okay, so that's a grand total of about 30, 40, almost 50,000 engagements, right? And that's not even counting like shares and stuff like that. So that's about 10% of the 500,000 people who watched it. 10% of them engaged with it in some way, right? And my target always is 5%. So I consider that, double what I was looking for. So that was a great success, right? Now, a ton of those comments were very shitty, right? I would say a lot, probably at least half of those were really shitty. But remember, I'm only trying to get 5% of that 50,000 who engaged. I'm only trying to get 5% of those people to actually convert, right? If I can get that to happen, it's a great success. And I know for a fact that more than 5% of the 50,000 people who engaged had some kind of positive interaction. And just from reading and being in touch with the comments that I'm getting, I know that a lot of people have said, hey, you know what? This actually makes sense, right? And I could go through, I haven't done this, but I could go in and analytically try to find out how many people actually did that. And then I would have a very good data metric for the impact of my Beauty Pipeline video. And that's something that's a lot easier to do when you're first starting out and you have much smaller numbers. Obviously, it's a lot more difficult to mine 50,000 engagements worth of data than it would be to mine like 100 instances of engagement. So I would say getting data metrics early on, do it while you can and while the numbers are manageable, because the bigger you do grow, the more difficult it's going to be to mine this kind of data. And then you can get a really good idea of what's working and what's not. But don't get discouraged if you're making materials and it seems like you're getting a lot of negative comments, because again, if you're getting 5% of the people who watched your video to change their position, you are doing great work for our movement. And you can maximize the number of conversions you get. You can maximize the number of people that you win over to leftist ideology by remembering to target, to have impact, to get a lot of reach, and make sure that you're frequently reaching the same people over and over again. These are the very, very basic concepts of marketing. And if you use these methods, if you use these scientifically proven techniques when you're planning your content and when you're building and designing your programming, you're going to do good work for the left. You don't have to be as good as ContraPoints. I'm not nearly as good as ContraPoints. I'm not nearly as clever as Ollie. I'm not nearly as funny as H-Bomber Guy. But I know for a fact, because I've had people tell me, that I have won people over to the side of leftism. I have convinced people through this platform, and Luna obviously does a lot of work with me as well, and is half the team here. We have absolutely convinced people to join our movement. And it's a lot of people. If you play the long game and you think about it in terms of the math, it's absolutely possible to do this with, basically competent, generally good, dare I say even mediocre quality work. And that's why Luna and I encourage as many people as possible to get out there, start making content, start doing things. It doesn't have to be like an Oscar-worthy epic film. It doesn't have to be as good as what ContraPoints is doing. It just has to be good enough. Because if you make a channel and you get 500 people to watch a video, and then 1,000 other people do the same thing, suddenly we're getting the numbers. Suddenly we're getting the reach collectively as a movement that we want to have. And that's the last thing that I'll address, is that we should not be thinking of our platforms individually. We are socialists. We need to be social about this. So don't think about your channel, in a vacuum. Think about how your channel can fit into the environment and the ecosystem and the movement and the community of BreadTube, of LeftTube. Think about how you can contribute to the overall math. And remember, even if you're producing kind of mediocre content and your content's not that great, I would argue that my content in the grand scheme of things is sort of middling. I don't feel like I'm as talented as somebody like Ollie or ContraPoints or H-Bomber Guy. But what I can do is I can turn people on to those channels. I could recommend books like The Conquest of Bread by Pyotr Kropotkin or Anarcho-Syndicalism, Theory and Practice by Rudolf Rocker. I can introduce people to stuff that's better than my own stuff. And in that sense, even if my content is not extraordinary, I'm introducing people to leftist content that is extraordinary. And in that sense, I am absolutely building momentum for our movement. Don't think about your small channel with your small sub count as meaningless, because if you took all the little tiny channels on LeftTube and you put them all together, that's a ton of reach and impact that we're having. So again, last thing I'll say, if you haven't made a channel, I strongly encourage you to think about whether or not that's something that you could or should do. I think it's very likely that if you have a decent grasp on the basics of leftism, this is something that most of us should and could be doing, right? And if you've been doing it for a long time and you're frustrated and you feel like you're not getting any traction, talk to some comrades, find some comrades to work with within your niche, within your target audience who have like similar aesthetics and values and ideological platforms as you, and work together on these principles, apply them to your channel, and you'll see growth. And all of that growth is contributing to the leftist movement. So let's market for communism, comrades. That's all for now, but I will be following this up. If enough people like this video, I'll make more and go into more depth about some of these topics. But that's it for now. I'm American Johnson. This is Non-Compete. Spread the bread. Bye-bye. Take care of each other.